Okay, I'd like to take that last hour's worth of review of mine, introducing tools and concepts, and use them in some way. So what we're going to do is go to Google, we're going to search for some imagery, and we're going to bring that imagery to our project directory, and we're going to reference that imagery to build a very simple object. Alright, so let's pop into Google search here, and I want to search for a stack of boxes and see what's going to come up here. And lo and behold, my favorite image for teaching this lesson is right here at the top, stack of boxes. So I'm going to hit Windows E and bring up a browser for me to go to my project directory on my X drive and modeling in Maya, and I want to bring this into my source images folder, and I'm going to make a little subfolder right here, new folder, and I'm going to call this my stack of boxes reference, and I'm going to go inside there, pull up this reference, and then just drag and drop a copy right into that folder. So here we go, stack of boxes, source images, 3D modeling, and my project directories. Very good. So we don't need this anymore. We'll close that. I want to bring that image into Maya, and I've got a couple different ways to do this. I've kind of got my sculptor's way of doing this, my artistic eyeballing kind of way of doing this, and that's where you can go to your let's see here, where is it? Render view, here we go. Rendering editors, render view, and in here is where you would normally view your renders, but you can also preview images that you've brought into your project directory. So you can see that it's looking for the images folder because that's normally where this window would search in. But I'm going to hit the up arrow and go into my source images, stack of boxes, and pick my image. And then I can just fit that right here into the view and even tuck it off to the side while I'm modeling. That's one way to do it. Another way to bring in this image is to use the image plane feature of your cameras. So right down here in the front viewport, view, and image plane and import image. And here it does look for the source images folder, and it automatically, we can see stack of boxes, pick my stack of boxes, and hit open. And you can see that it puts the reference in the camera view on a camera plane, image plane, and that is locked to the front view. And I can edit this image plane. I'd like to make some changes to where this image lives in the viewport. So I can do that one of two ways. I'm sure there's maybe 10 ways of doing this, but two that I can think of. Under image plane attributes, and edit that attribute, and it pops open right here in the attribute editor. Another way of doing it, if I deselect everything, is to go to my outliner, number 8 on my keyboard. That's my custom key. Front camera, is the one I want. Attribute editor, and you can see right here is that plane, image plane shape, and then image plane 1. Image plane shape is what I'm looking for. And that pretty much gives me the same property, so you could dig it up a couple of different ways. Just bear in mind that this object, or this node, is a child of or is associated to the front camera. So I can actually check this button right here called Looking Through Camera, and it will hide all the other views except the front view I'm looking through. I can also decrease the gain, so it's a little easier on the eyes, and it's also easier to see wireframes over top of that. Another thing I'd like to change is this grid and how it sits over top of the object in this viewport. I'd like to change that. Of course, I need to select that again. Select this again. There we go. Right down here. Here we go. The image center. This is the X, the Y, and the Z. So I want to push it back. or bring it forward on the z-axis in this case. So I'm going to bring it forward like 0.1 positively, so that when I look at this viewport now and I select that object, I don't have this grid over top of it. Or maybe you do want the grid over top of it. I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do. In that case, I would just set it to a negative 1.1 and push it back behind it. I can also change the center of the camera. Oh yeah, and you know that virtual slider stuff we were doing with the channel box earlier? I can do that with any of these inputs right here too. So I can hold down the control key. I was going to say Apple, but that's when you're using a Macintosh. So I guess if you're on a Macintosh, I think it's the Apple key. On a Windows, it's just holding down control, and then I'm middle clicking and dragging in the viewport, and it's got a virtual slider. Middle clicking and dragging in that number right there, that input right there, excuse me, input is what I'm looking for. And I can move this up and down along the ground plane. So that's pretty cool right there. And let's see here. And of course, the same thing on the X if you need to do that. Again, control and middle clicking and dragging. But I think it's just fine centered on the X. Okay, so what I want to do here is bring in objects, cubes in this case, and make a stack of boxes referencing this image. I don't necessarily want to match the image, but I suppose if you wanted to go so far as to do that, that's fine. It's really not critical for me right now. So I'm going to go into that step next. So the next step is to bring in cubes and change the pivot of those cubes, do some snapping and some stacking, and try and come up with an object that looks similar to this. I would actually like to match the image with a camera that looks at my boxes similar to how the photographer had photographed those boxes. So meaning is that I don't want to match the image that's right there in front of me by tracing it. I want to match it by having some sense of what the camera's field of view is, what the focal length of that camera is, and making visual decisions, eyeballing it, if you will, to make a stack of boxes similar to this image. Okay, let's start with the cube first, and I'm actually going to bring up that that image again, and I'm just going to tuck it here off to the side, like that. And I'm also going to bring in a new camera. I'm going to do that under Create, Camera, and let's just do a standard camera. And I'm going to look through that camera by going to Panels, Perspective, and here's my new Camera 1. And now I'm actually looking through it, and now I can navigate this view through the eyes of Camera 1. And I can even rename Camera 1 either in the Attribute Editor or the Outliner or the Channel Box. I can rename it in any of those places. I could also rename it right here. Actually, let's use that. I don't use it that much. Let's use this. So let's just call this Shot 1. That looks nice. And from here, I'm going to make sure that my focal length is in fact similar to the focal length of that camera. I'm going to assume that it was 35. And it might be 55, but I'm going to say it's probably 35. Most people have 35mm cameras. That's standard stuff. Let's add a ground. So let's get a polygon plane. And let's hit number 5 to turn on shaded. Let's also turn on the shading menu, wireframe on shaded. And for now, I don't really need that grid to be visible, so I'm going to go to Show and turn off the grid here. some of you may be inclined to go here to turn off the grid, but I wouldn't do that because that is all of the grids everywhere. You probably don't want that. Most of the time, you just want to turn off the grid for this specific viewport. So I'm going to move this box onto the ground, and I know how to get it on the ground exactly because I know that this cube is 1 unit tall. So that means I can move it approximately 0.5, or exactly 0.5, to have it right there on the ground, flush on the ground. I'll hit F to frame up the cube into the viewport. So I'm going to hit the home key. I'm sorry, that's Macintosh thinking. Insert key, and I'm going to hold down V and snap that to the bottom corner of the box, and then I'm going to hit insert again to make that the permanent location of the pivot point. Very good. So then I'm going to move my camera, and I'm basically matching this cube right here. It's just so that you understand my thinking. I'm looking at this box, and I'm going to sort of just, I don't know, move it around a little bit and try and get like this angle and maybe this amount of visual on the top, and you know, something kind of like that. I could even go as far as to frame this in the camera by turning on something called resolution gate. And resolution gate would actually give me a frame to see what this looks like, and I could actually see right here, it says in my image it's 253 by 380. Go to my render settings. I'm getting a little fancy here, but you know, it's fun. Enter in those numbers exactly, 253 by 380. And now I've got a frame that matches the frame of this image. How about that, huh? That's nice. And so now I can even start making some visual guesses on, you know, what is this distance of this corner to this edge, and what is this corner to this edge. And, you know, yeah, that looks pretty good. That's okay. So now that I've got a cube and a camera, and I've got a focal length, and I've got framing, I just need to start putting in the other elements. And honestly, I don't need to see what it looks like on the other side of the boxes. I just need to see what it looks like from this viewpoint. My shot doesn't require anything else. So I'm going to make this simple for myself as possible. I'm simply going to duplicate this cube with a Control D. And that will make a new cube that I can move to the side. And notice that it keeps the pivot point, so I don't have to edit the pivot point again. It keeps the translation, keeps the rotation, keeps the scale, and now I can do something else to it. So I want to scale it down, so I want to look at, say, this box right here on the left-hand side, and maybe make some small rotations. Notice how it's intersecting here in the back. Don't worry about that because I'm actually going to scale it down. Maybe move it over a wee bit. Maybe scale it. And I want to scale it based on object rotation. Now we're getting even smarter because now I can push the length of this back, and now I've got a slightly longer box. This box is slightly longer than it is tall and wide. So now I can move this around a bit, rotate it a bit on the y-axis. And notice I can even simplify my rotations by holding down the E key and clicking and holding and switching to the gimbal mode. So I eliminate that viewport, and I also get this extra visual of gimbal lock, where you can see right here where my X and Z rotation are going to collapse onto each other, which is another way of saying they've locked, or they have gimbal lock. That's very handy, but I really like the gimbal mode too because it gets rid of that extra view rotation, which I tend to bump, and I don't want to bump it. So this object is on the ground, and I actually would like to bookmark this work that I've done before I go any further. I can bookmark it by going here to View and say Bookmark, Edit Bookmark, and say Make a new bookmark, and I will hit Close. So what happens now is that when I go to the View menu for this viewport, and for this camera is that I have these predefined bookmarks at these different positions, but then I have this camera view right here. So if for some reason I accidentally move this view, I can actually go back to View, Bookmarks, and choose that camera, and it will snap right back to the hard work that I've done earlier of trying to get that spacing just right. Okay, moving on, I'm going to duplicate this cube and translate, and I'm even going to snap this pivot to the top side of the box by holding down V again, and I'm going to click and snap to the top of the box, and now it's flush at the top of the box, which is really nice. And I'm going to scale it down, make it a little bit smaller. I'm working on this box right here, and push it back a bit, maybe rotate it a bit. Looking at that little bit of corner there and this little space right here. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm okay with that. I'll take this again, the original one, duplicate it. I'll make this bigger one in the back. I'm assuming it's the same size. Can't see everything here, but it is rotated towards me, so I'm going to rotate that this direction. So I have this shape, something like that. Again, all I'm looking for is to make sure that it doesn't clip right here. Clipping meaning where one object intersects another. Okay, I'll take that one and duplicate it and translate it and snap it to the top. So again, it's flush. I would say that's about the same size box, so I'll just do a minor rotation to it. Translation to it. Something like that. That's fine. Doesn't have to be perfect right now. And then duplicate that again, translate again, and holding down V again, snapping it to the top of the next box, and rotating it again. So there you have it. Maybe scale this one down. It looks like a slightly smaller box. So there you have it. Stack of boxes, pivot points, framing, bookmarks, and all that wonderful stuff in about 10 minutes, 11 minutes. That's just great. So then I can make additional changes, maybe adjust this a bit, maybe adjust the ground, maybe throw some shaders on it. We could go a little bit further with this, but I think this is exactly where I want to be right now. You should take the time to build this as well if you haven't already done it with me. Now that we have the stack of boxes, I think this would be an excellent opportunity to talk about the 3-edge rule. Back in 2002, when I started teaching at American River College, I had to find a way to explain myself on the way I think when I'm modeling, and particularly when I'm organic modeling, humans, creatures, trees, things like that. But I found that it became even applicable to industrial modeling, hard-edge modeling, and I needed a way to summarize it, some way I could, in a couple of quick words, describe to my students what it is I'm talking about and how to think about their models. And that thing I came up with is the 3-edge rule. So to describe this a little bit further, I'm going to go to a different camera view. So I'm going to switch this panel to my perspective view and expand it. And I'm going to bring in a cube and tuck it off to the side over here, and I'm going to frame it up. Alright, I'm going to hit number 5 for shaded. So here we've got a basic standard cube, and if I also want to bring in something else. I want to bring in a light. So I'm going to go to Create, Lights, Spotlight, and I'm going to hit T on the keyboard. Remember I mentioned that earlier in the QWERTY setup. And I'm going to cast a light onto this object. So T allows me to manipulate the spotlight where the spotlight is looking. and where the spotlight is casting from. And I'm going to hit number 7 on the keyboard to actually see the effect of this light. So if I frame up the box here, F for framing it up. Number 5 is your standard lighting, default lighting, which comes from the camera. And then number 7 is the lighting that comes from the lights in the scene. Now, when I deselect this, what I see in front of me is harkens back to like the Q*bert days of video gaming. Hard-edged, no definition of material, no definition of light in the scene. I can't see the light other than these three faces, the dark side and the light side of the light. So if I take this, advance this a little bit forward, like let's step up to like Star Fox days of, what was that, Super Nintendo. I'll duplicate this and move this forward. Actually, this might be even a little bit more advanced. This might be more like early PlayStation graphics, like Final Fantasy VII cutscenes or something. And what I'm going to do is bevel the edges of this box. So I'm going to go to Edges. I'm going to select them all by drawing a big marquee over all of them. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to say Bevel, Option Box. And I've already set up the option box to have a width of 0.25 and a segments of 2. So if I just change that offset to something like 0.1, make it a little tighter, and then go to Object Mode and deselect it, you can see a significant increase in realism between the polygon box, the without any beveling, versus the polygon box with the beveling. So what I get are these 2 extra planes on every edge, and then 3 extra polygons on every corner, each 4-point polygons, telling me, communicating to me the direction of the light, the quality of the light, and if I were to apply a material to this, let's say I applied a Phong material to this, I would even start seeing the highlights of that material. So if we step it up a little bit, like move forward to like the year 2000 and like special effects beyond NURBS modeling, like we're getting in the subdivision surfaces, I could take this object and duplicate it, move it forward a little bit here, and I'm going to hit number 3 on my keyboard, which is the Mental Ray shortcut for smoothness subdivision surfaces. This is what you would see in a Mental Ray render. So now we're up even higher in quality, and again, the reason this works is because I have 3 edges dictating that corner, at least 3, and I have a applied subdivision surfaces to it, which has put some tension on the mesh. It's pulled on the wireframe being the outlines of the object, and it's giving me a significant increase in quality. And in terms of visualizing that material and visualizing the realism of this object. And there's one more way that I could do this. I'm going to take the original one here, duplicate it, and that's where I can dictate each edge. That's where I can dictate each edge individually by using the Insert Edge Loop tool. And I can go in here and control per corner what the quality is going to be. So I could control, let's hit Q to drop out of that tool. I mentioned that earlier. I'm going to hit number 3. So you can see here now I have sort of a partial control over the sharpness of this corner and how soft these corners are. And I also, again, with the light, I have a definition of what the material is. So I can go over here, say new material. Let's say it's a blend. Where are you hiding? There you are. And we'll make that a slight tint of blue there. So now I get a much different type of highlight across that, and I can see that more clearly when I control those edges. So like if I double click this and translate that edge, I can actually soften that top edge or sharpen that top edge. I could even fold over on that top edge, all with the control with 3 edges. So if I switch back to faces, you can see how I'm going past there. I'm actually clipping now. I'm causing this sort of fracturing and graphical arrows, that's your visual cue that there's a problem and that you've got two polygons overlapping each other. So I'm going to make sure that I just get really, really, really tight, but not overlap it. So when I go back to number 3 for subdivision surfaces, I have a very sharp object mode again. I have a very sharp corner, very clean. So the 3-edge rule is about using 3 edges in order to control the level of quality, to control the sharpness, to control the bluntness of corners, with and without subdivision surfaces. So you would probably use this kind of quality mesh for architectural, landscape pieces, maybe even large organic meshes, or maybe instance meshes on particle emitters. But you might use something like this if you're just building a single cell phone for some kind of commercial spot on ABC or something. You might have this kind of quality. So depending on what it is, but still, I'm still thinking about having 3 edges in order to control detail. Another for example would be, let's say I wanted to have like a little divot in this mesh. I just want to have like a crease running down this box as if it was some kind of cushion or something. I would have to insert at least 3 to dictate some kind of quality control over how sharp this crease is going to be. So let's say with that selected, I'm going to scale it inward. And so now I can make a little crease on this box. And then I can take, say, this edge loop by double-clicking it. I'll hit W for translate. I'll hold down Shift and double-click this edge loop. And now I can, let's hit R for scale. And now I can scale those 2 edges closer to each other, making this uber tight, uber sharp crease. And even with subdivision surfaces, it looks pretty good. So again, I can't do that any other way. I have to have 3 in order to achieve that kind of detail. So when I'm building things like creatures and human beings with fingernails and teeth and creases on their face, you have to think in sets of 3. Another way to think about it is you have edges that hold and then edges that fold. And this I use when I get to the cat, when we start modeling with the cat and start doing organic meshes. There's the edges that are kind of defining the overall contours of the character, and then there are the edges that meshes will fold onto itself when it's enveloped with bones. Again, thinking of it in sets of 3. So with this in mind, with this very simple thought, and I will be coming back to this again and again and again as we're working, and it's going to be on the next model that we make. You can make fantastically complicated things even with limited sculpture experience, limited painting and drawing experience. As long as you can exercise your powers of observation and think of this simple rule as you go along, everything else can be sorted as you go, and you can make very complex things. Before going back to the boxes, I'd like to say one more thing and point out one more rule that I model by and teach with, and that is don't model in subdivision surfaces. I'll repeat, don't model while in subdivision surfaces. Okay, so the reason for this is because you could very easily create folds and creases that may look interesting in subdivision surfaces, but could very likely be great distortions in polygon mode. And what I mean by that is, if I continue to pull this point away, like let's say I want to make a spike or something, that's the shape I'm looking for, right? Let's just assume that that's what I'm looking for. The problem is, when it comes time to UV texture this, animate it, throw bones in it, do other effects to it, I actually find that it's not high enough in geometry, and that I'm going to have a severe amount of texture stretching. And in the end, it just causes more problems than not. And you can even see here in face mode that it's really quite distorted. And I want these polygons to be as square-like as possible. They don't have to be square, but just close to square. And that makes it very easy for them to be textured. Another example would be here. It's in subdivision surfaces, but that's because I was previewing the crease in subdivision surfaces, but I have no intent to actually model it in subdivision surfaces. If I want to continue modeling this object and continue modeling these cushions, I'm going to go into faces and then continue to do whatever I need to do to this in this particular mode. So let's say I wanted to further crease this edge. I'll do that in face mode and do the bevel, whatever it is that needs to be done, and then go back to subdivision surfaces to preview my work and see how it's coming along. That's more or less how I like you to think about subdivision surfaces. It's the finalizing step, it's the tweaking step, it's the icing on the cake, it's the goal you're trying to achieve, but it certainly should not be where you're modeling. And I know if you're coming from a program like Lightwave or Modo or something similar to that, you may be more inclined, or even ZBrush, you may be more inclined to work organically by staying in subdivision surfaces while you're modeling. And I can't stress enough that you shouldn't do that, because all of the other processes of the 3D animation pipeline look to the raw polygons and not the subdivision surfaces. And there's so many other ways to smooth a mesh, and I'll talk about them more in later videos. Conversions and render settings. There's just different ways of smoothing corners. We don't always have to use subdivision surfaces, so it's just something to keep in mind. So again, the second rule, besides the 3-edge rule, is the next one is don't model in subdivision surfaces. Okay, so let's get back to the boxes. Here, so let's pop back to the other camera and do a little bit of work, very, very simple things for this simple object. I'm going to select everything except the ground plane. Oh yeah, I did that by selecting everything, and then I hold Control and I deselect the ground plane, and so I'm able to select everything except the ground plane. And I'm going to, I don't have to go into edge mode. I'm going to bevel every single edge here because they are very simple cubes, and I'm just going to hit bevel, and I'm going to decrease the offset to maybe 0.1, and looks like I'm going to have to do that from the onset. Looks like I'm going to have to edit that in the option box. Let's just change that to 0.1, and there we go. That looks nice, and I can hit number 3 for subdivision surfaces, maybe even turn off the wireframe, maybe even apply a material. Let's apply a Phong material, maybe give it a bit of brown, something brownish, and maybe tone down the specular color, increase the diffuse, there we go, something like that. So we have a slightly better quality, and let's bring that spotlight over. So let's pop back over this view, and let's just translate globally that spotlight right over here, and pop back over to this camera, hit number 7 for this viewport, and we can even turn on show shadows, and I can even go to the attribute editor for that light, shadows, and let's turn on the depth map shadows. Let's increase the resolution. This is all dependent really on your video card, but I'm going to increase the resolution to 1024. And there we go. We've got some basic shadows for these boxes, and I can hit T for the manipulators and change exactly where that light is looking. Maybe even break out the image and try and match where that light is, probably coming from up above. Here we go. Simple enough, clean enough, and good enough for now. So the 3-edge rule, I'll be talking about that a lot more, and especially in the next objects. I'll be reiterating it several times.